Hi, I'm your host, Marlo Lemon, and you're listening to Wild Voice, the podcast where I take this voice of mine and share my wild journey with you. Being widowed at 34 with a 15-month-old, most would see as life ending. And instead, I alchemized it and put life back together, and it became more beautiful and fulfilling than I could have ever imagined. Through this life shift of mine, I realized who I am and what I'm here to do. I'm an intuitive energy healer, and sharing how I view the world is how I help you upgrade your life and alchemize your journey into magic. From day one, I wanted to share my journey, call it intuition, but I knew it was going to do more good out in the world than keeping it to myself. So when I say I've mastered life, that doesn't mean I'm perfect or that life is. I mean, I've mastered the concept of life, and I want to share that with you. Okay, so today's episode is with Thomas Typinski. He's an 8-year Army veteran, serial entrepreneur, and a certified holistic lifestyle coach with the Czech Institute. Since 2018, he has been focusing his energy on helping men to build high-value traits in order to break generational curses through his coaching program, the Lionmaker Leadership Academy. Men's work is a huge passion of mine, not only for how it applies to my own life, but also the power it has to impact the collective. Strong men in their purpose and integrity makes this world a better place, and I will always be passionate about supporting that any way I can. Thomas and I have also connected on this wild ride of parenting and raising little humans to be conscious, mindful individuals themselves. I look forward to what Thomas and I are going to share with you today. We're going to give insight and our own perspective and experience on the masculine and feminine dynamics, helping us all upgrade that connection and understanding of one another. Hi, Thomas. How are you?
I'm good. How about you?
Good. I'm so glad this worked out today. I know you were traveling. Your red eye last night or this morning.
Uh, yes, that was not fun, but all good. I,
You made it. Are you
I
are you
feel
half asleep?
I feel all right. I feel a little bit tired, but
Yeah.
yeah, I feel like red eyes have never been that bad, but last night I was tired. I
Yeah.
didn't sleep at all on the plane. It was not
Oh,
comfortable. I came back and I had like probably 4 hours of sleep, and then I had picked up my daughter from her mom's house. So
oh my gosh.
it
So
was
you're just on the move.
yeah. Let me just clean this up real quick. Yeah, I was
Okay.
on the move for sure.
Yeah. And it's okay too, because actually I'm the only one that will actually see this part.
Oh,
So
okay. All right.
yeah, you don't even have to worry about it. I pretty much
Okay.
use the audio part.
Okay.
And that makes it
Cool.
easy.
Yeah.
Um,
How have you been? How are
I've
things going with you?
Good, good. Just feels like busy. Like I'm sure you know, with you're trying to like start new things and you're also parenting and trying to live your own life and be like a really conscious, human being who takes care of themselves. It's a lot of work sometimes. So
It's
that's
nonstop.
it is, right? And I think
Nonstop.
that's why a lot of people have a hard time kind of balancing it because it does take, even to this day, I still have moments and weeks I'm like, whoa, I'm super like out of alignment here. Like I've done nothing for myself this week. Like it can happen easily. So I have a lot of compassion for people that have difficulty figuring that out.
Yeah. I look forward to this conversation because
Hmm.
I know that you're, in tuned and aware of a lot of that stuff and have some good
Yeah.
tips and information. And it's not easy sometimes. I wish that there was a way that you could just like be in the groove from now on. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Right.
Not just
Like
have to continue to go back to it. Just always
exactly.
be there.
Like a set it and forget it. And it's
Yeah.
just always there in this like, blueprint.
Yeah.
So I think with what we'll talk about today, it's kind of the idea, right? I think what you do, and I'll learn more about it today. And what I do is we try and give those kind of blueprints in a way to make it as easy as possible. So people don't feel like they're starting over every time they have a bad week or it's kind of an easier pickup than it is initially. So
Yeah.
yeah, so I'm excited, but I know we wanted to talk about, and I had kind of said the masculine and feminine dynamics, and I'm just excited about this conversation because for a lot of reasons. Um, I find it not a lot of us know much about it until we kind of get into this world of consciousness and mindfulness and working on ourselves, do we understand like what's the healthy masculine and what's the healthy feminine? And I find that just crazy that for me personally, I think I was mid 30s before I even knew what that was. And to me, that's just a disservice to me and the people around me, right? Because the more I understand myself, the better I can be for those around me and show up in my purpose and all of that. So I'm excited to talk about this today because I want to get your perspective. And obviously, I've learned a lot about the healthy masculine, as I'm sure you know a lot about the healthy feminine, but I'm not a man. So there's a lot of things I just don't know. And I don't, I love getting perspective and being able to relate because having a son also, that is really important to me that I learn these things. So as I raise him, I can make sure I support that and instill those things in him. And I just think it's cool to have a community and men like yourself that are doing this sort of work. So I want to thank you and I'm excited. So
Absolutely. Me too. Same. Thank you also. And I have a daughter, so it's, it's the inverse, the yin and the yang for
yeah.
sure.
Yeah, see, and it's interesting to parent that way and I can't wait to get your thoughts on it. But where I wanted to start is kind of to help people understand, assuming we're kind of building the foundation as we continue to talk and give people the understanding of what attributes are of like the healthy masculine and maybe what they are of, I guess, what do people call it now? Toxic masculinity, or it's tough because I don't necessarily love labeling things a certain way, but I think to give people an idea what these different traits are so they can be like, oh, like this is what this feels like. This is what this feels like. So, can you give me your definition of kind of what you have found encompasses that like healthy, purposeful masculinity and what someone would know if they're kind of not in that spot yet?
Sure. I actually think that there is only masculine,
Okay.
that there's not like a healthy and unhealthy masculinity. I think that most people, especially most men, I can only speak for the men, I talk to a lot of men, think that masculinity is actually being macho. That
Mm-hmm.
being macho is actually what masculinity is. So I think that when people talk about, and this is like common. I have some of the questions that you told me that we were going to be talking about today, and there
Mm-hmm.
is a recurring theme about this. Just about um, the toxicness comes from too much macho-ness and not enough masculinity. I feel like masculinity is the embodiment of
Mm-hmm.
a good balance of feminine and masculine. And, that's for both. That's for the men and women. I think that there could be toxic macho-ness from a woman and
Mm-hmm.
also from a man. So I think it's just a matter of focusing too much on like the aggressive traits, or the grit your teeth and bear it traits, or the boys aren't able to cry traits. And it's funny because that's all that I really focused on before when I was coaching men, was more of the macho traits. But
Mm-hmm.
then life and the universe said, hey, guess what, I'm going to put you through some stuff. And I had to really embrace and see the benefit for myself of having more of that balance and getting in tune with my masculinity, then taking full responsibility for not being in my masculinity in relationships and in life, and then kind of realizing the power of it and the contrast between being macho and being masculine.
I love that. And that actually resonates big time. So I appreciate you explaining it that way because I never really resonated. Like as I was telling you, when it's saying like toxic and the only other word I could think was healthy, but I love that. So masculinity in your words, and now will be mine, is the kind of balance of that yin and yang and that masculine energy that we all really yearn for. And I think the feminine is definitely yearning for. And I see a big shift in that. So I think that's awesome. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the masculinity is like the dominant, strong, independent, assertive, brave, courageous, innovative, doing
Mm-hmm.
things that are kind of more out in the world in action.
Mm-hmm.
And the feminine is more emotional, nurturing, vulnerable, caring, things like that. So I think that there is a separation. But in order to be like, when you talk about healthy masculine, I think it's just like healthy man. Like to be a healthy man is to be a good embodiment of the masculine and the feminine. It's actually something that I'm kind of going through right now, just being able to, because there's a lot of crap out there about masculinity that is just macho-ness, and that is coming from fear, and that is coming from scarcity, and a place that doesn't give, it isn't as fulfilling in a relationship or in life as it is if you can embody all of that.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And that definitely is where this all kind of starts and where I have found. So going off of, because, I know we have some things I had said I wanted to talk about, but I said I'd also just let it flow and see where it went.
Sure.
So on the topic of masculinity and how you've described it, and that kind of forward motion action, kind of outward, right? More of the outward energy where the feminine is more of the inward. I have found masculinity, you can have it be it can be so many different things with each person, right? Kind of where they dip in, where it's higher, where their personality holds certain things in a higher regard. Sorry, there's an airplane that's going by right now. Being in your head, I find that what I have learned with the masculine is, and not to generalize, but from my experience, it's a lot of task driven. Things need to get done, action oriented. I need to get this done. This is how I need to do it. I need a plan, and then I need to follow through and I need to complete it. And that's part of kind of that fulfillment, checking these things off the list that you have created that you want to complete that bring fulfillment. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, what are your thoughts on when it can get too heady and there's a lot of thinking and there's a lot of black and white tasks and logic, and where that balance of the masculinity tends to kind of waver a little bit? Do you find in your men's groups or with yourself or any experience you've had? Because I find that is something that takes a little experience and understanding to either understand yourself or to help someone kind of work through that.
I find that women are a lot better at multitasking and getting to the finish line through flow, whereas men are more hunters and have to be focused in order to accomplish tasks. So I have a system that is called the Lifestyle by Design system, and basically what it is like a block schedule. It's pretty rigid, and it comes from my military background. And I've shared it with some women, some adapt it, some don't, but the rigidity of it, I believe, is not something that the feminine enjoys. But the masculine, I feel like, thrives in it, right? Like we need it. So we need a balance. So it's kind of like, I feel like every woman has a certain ratio of feminine and masculine, and the more masculine, maybe the more those linear thoughts and those linear lists work for them. Or if they're like more in their feminine, then they just kind of flow and life works out, right? And they're kind of more in tuned. And I think it's the same with men. Is like it's interesting. There's no like, this is it for you,
right?
Because even if I know where I'm at as far as like percentage, I'm 60% masculine, 40% feminine. It can flow from interaction dynamics of feminine and feminine. So it's kind of, you just have to be present with it every day. How do you feel? Just losing you a little bit.
Yeah, I think you're frozen here for a second. I'm gonna see if it'll catch up. I think I think you're back. Okay, I can see you. You're moving now. Okay. So yes, I got the last part. It started to break up when you were talking about how there's not just one thing for everybody, and it kind of just depends, and how that was kind of where it started to cut out. So the last little bit you were saying, will you say that again?
Yeah, I was just saying that it's difficult even to have a formula, even for yourself. And that's where I think it's really important to be in tune with yourself, to know, what it is that you need. And I think for a man to be in his healthy masculine, he's always going to need that linear thought to work towards accomplishing a goal. But if that part is really hard for them, then I think that that's like their feminine calling out like, hey, we need to do some creative things. We need to do some things that are, with our body. We need to do some things that are kind of getting us in touch and grounded with nature and our surroundings so that we can get back to the focus.
Oh, I love that. I love that because that kind of is just that, again, that's where I land, that ebb and flow, right? If something's not working, try something different and don't hold yourself to this one way of doing things. And so I love that because that's a really good reminder for any of us, right? But a lot of the men too that listen, and knowing that even though you have one way of doing something, if it starts to not be working for you, or it's not fulfilling, or it starts to get this weird feeling to it, then to try something different and see that that's kind of your body's way, universe's way of kind of getting you to shift a little bit. So I love that. And that's good for us to know as female energies and masculine energy. Like, it's good to know the other side, because if we don't know how, like, if I don't know how my boyfriend operates, and then he goes down this path, I'm like, wait a minute, like, that's not how I would do it. Or I think to myself, like, oh, this feels like you don't even care. I'm like, oh, his way of caring actually is creating this plan, completing this task, because supporting and providing and completing this task is part of that showing up and saying, I'm here, I'm here for you kind of thing. So it's really good to know these things because it helps us kind of understand not only ourselves, but other people in our life. And this could be relationships, family members, coworkers, whatever it might be. So I think that's pretty magical to learn. And yes, the rigidness, I would say I'm one of those people that does not prefer that.
Yeah,
And
right.
the more rigid it gets, the more I'm like, so,
Right.
so I can totally relate to that.
I feel like
But
women have an easier time being in tune with that than men
mm-hmm,
do,
mm-hmm,
just because by nature you're more in tune.
yeah,
And men just like I found that, I mean, we talk about relationships, we talk about finances, we talk about, the way we structure our days, and everything that works for us is very rule based, right? So
mm-hmm,
we need rules. Like,
mm-hmm,
related to relationships, we need rules.
mm-hmm,
So, for example, like, a man needs to be a stone bowl or a rock and the woman is water. We need to have those reminders so that
mm-hmm,
we know how to act. Whereas
mm-hmm,
I feel like women are just have an easier time. Women that are like in their feminine
mm-hmm,
have an easier time of flowing in and out of that
mm-hmm.
than men do, because they're like, if I don't have the rules for this, then I don't know, because there's just so many ways, especially with all of the noise on social media. There's millions, hundreds of accounts out there that are talking about masculinity and what is
Yeah.
masculinity and what is healthy masculinity, and you must do this, you must do that, and we're very receptive to it. And
Mm-hmm,
it actually messed me up a lot because
mm-hmm,
I got into it. And then when I am getting into relationships, it's like, well, I really want to be vulnerable. I
mm-hmm,
really want to open up, but I can't, because then she'll leave me, and, she'll think I'm not a high value man and all this
mm-hmm,
other shit. Right. And
mm-hmm,
so
mm-hmm.
that is the toxic masculinity. That's not true masculinity. That is hard to navigate. It's hard to navigate because we want rules. Like, okay, I'll listen to those rules and I'll follow those, and everything will be
Yeah.
fine. And my woman will be happy forever, and
Mm-hmm.
I'll make money and everything's good and I'll be in tune with, but it's not exactly what feels good for us.
Yeah. No, that's totally, and that's how I have felt. And it's good for us to see and know, because to know and females are the same way, right? So feminine energy, we're the same way in the sense of, oh, we're supposed to be, vulnerable and open and easygoing and go with the flow. And so the moments that things challenge that, or we get fearful, or we have human moments like men do, you start to then second guess, and that you kind of go down this rabbit hole and this armor goes up, and then you kind of don't know how to act. And then it kind of puts your partner, or whatever the opposing, person on this other mirror of us, at odds and almost like on separate islands. And so that's why I think understanding this and being so open and communicating is such a powerful tool, because it, like someone just saying that, right? Like being like, I am this person, but I'm feeling this way in this moment. And I'm having a tough time being vulnerable. Like that is the most powerful and strong, like masculine thing to me for someone who starts, someone who's embodying that and sees these traits. So to know that someone can be this person and work towards this goal, but then at the same time be like, hey, I'm human. And to be vulnerable is actually extremely brave and is actually extremely like powerful and strong. So it's interesting the things that we have been led to believe, whether that's the way we've been raised or certain programmings of, we hear things over and over again. We start to believe it ourselves. It's kind of just happens innately. So it's nice to have an opportunity to kind of break some of these and bring these things to light, because sometimes just being authentic and kind of as honest as possible is super powerful in itself and strengthening even to a relationship. So I just give you kudos to that, to kind of navigate that, because I think some people kind of dip when it gets tough, right? Which is
Yeah,
those moments.
sure.
And then they're like, no, thank you.
It's for me in particular, right? I'm a
Mm-hmm.
guy who coaches masculinity, talks to men all the time, and so I need to have all of my stuff together. I was laying in bed, a couple of nights, but one night I was terrified, like freaking, just completely paralyzed, terrified, because I had pressure going on in my life, and I wanted to talk to my partner who was laying right next to me, and she
Mm-hmm.
said before, it's okay, always talk to me,
Mm-hmm.
and but I wanted to also like embody this masculine who had all of his stuff together and who,
Mm-hmm.
was able to endure anything. And through actually, waking her up and having the conversation and telling her how I feel and telling her basically what I just said, like there's all
Mm-hmm.
this stuff that's on the internet and it says I'm supposed to be this person and I like you a lot and I want to be open. And what do I want? What do I want?
Mm-hmm.
I want a relationship where I can open up and be vulnerable
Mm-hmm.
and be in tune with my feminine too,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like I am
Right.
an emotional person. I do have the feminine side of me too. I don't
Mm-hmm.
want to be just the masculine all the time. And so that was like, the relationships, it's interesting how they're always like, a path to self-development and
Mm-hmm.
they lead us where we need to go. And being in a healthy relationship where you have someone who has a good dynamic and a good balance, a good mirror of the masculine and feminine compared to my masculine feminine, her masculine feminine. It's a different thing, but it's scary. I mean, I think especially, I'm sure it's scary for a woman. I'm sure
Mm-hmm.
it's scary for a feminine because of lots of reasons, just physically being smaller,
Mm-hmm.
relying on a man in a lot of ways for safety and security, physical, mental,
Mm-hmm.
emotional. That's scary, but it's also scary for a guy because guys want to be loved too, you know?
Right. Which is actually really funny that you bring that up, because I think that gets missed. Like, just because the masculine is this strong, powerful presence, regardless of size, right? You could seem like the biggest, most powerful person, and it doesn't necessarily have to do with size. It's just a presence, and it's kind of this innate knowing. So size obviously helps, but to have that, and then to know that then you have these feelings and this vulnerability and this emotional side, and to know that actually I have found the most compassionate men to be the ones that are in this masculine presence, that they actually are in tuned, and because they can be so strong and powerful, they have this balance of this emotion that matches that. It doesn't mean it's the same, it's exposed the same or shared the same as the feminine does, but it's still there. And like you said, you guys want to be loved too. Like it's like, I find it, I have found that men have some of the biggest hearts. They just don't know what to do with them. Like they just like, what, I'm supposed to be strong and powerful and not cry and not, get worked up about something. And I don't know what to do with these emotions. So instead, I'm just going to pretend like they're not there. And I'm going to get them to go away because emotions are uncomfortable. They're a pain in the ass. And even the feminine, who has a lot of experience with emotions, we also don't prefer them a lot of the time. You know what I mean? No one likes those really heavy feelings that you get into, because it feels like it's a real far drop, and then it's really hard to figure out how to get back out. And that's what I think sharing some of this stuff and what we're talking about today is helping people see, not only like this is happening to everyone. Like, you're not alone. Like, this is normal stuff. And the more you lean into finding that balance and where you resonate with the most and nurturing that, it's where it kind of naturally balances out the other. And I don't know if you found that, but have you found as you've kind of leaned into that masculine that it's allowed it, the feminine part and the parts that are a little tougher, to kind of come with a little bit more ease as you move through it or into it?
Uh, Balancing it out for me.
Like, just like a feeling. Like, I would think if you were to compare, let's say, before you've done the work that you've, done on yourself now, or up to before, if you were to try and lean into some of those emotions, would they feel heavier and harder to kind of navigate than they do now, even though they feel raw sometimes?
Yeah, it was impossible. It
Yeah.
was impossible for me. I mean, I'm an 8-year Army veteran, oldest of 3 boys. Uh, and in an environment like the military, you could be sick and you can't go to, you can't even talk about going to the doctor, right? There's like so
Mm-hmm.
much that is toxic macho-ness, right? That is
Mm-hmm.
not healthy that's why I believe there's such a high divorce rate, and it's so hard for military men to be in relationships because they create no safe space
Mm-hmm.
for their partner or for themselves, and they think that they're convinced that they are being the epitome of a masculine man when
Mm-hmm.
they're actually being a scared boy,
Mm-hmm.
right? All the time. They can't open up, they can't be honest, they can never be wrong, they can
Yeah.
never be vulnerable. Like, it was impossible for me. I'm talking about like not it's like you I don't know. Like, you could reach into my soul and try and pull it out. It wouldn't come. It would never
Mm-hmm.
come. I would never get to that place. I could never open up. There was actually a couple of years ago when I was talking to a mutual friend of ours that, like,
Mm-hmm.
before, I never was able to cry. And I always thought, like, oh, I hear a song, and there might be like a little bit of tear coming up.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden I, like, had the right conversation and did some energy healing, and I cried for like 2 weeks straight. I got it all out. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it finally all came out, but before then it was like I thought something physically, that, like, maybe some of the shots they gave me or something was physically wrong with me, that I could not cry anymore. Honestly, it
Mm-hmm.
just like would not come out no matter what.
But it feels like that. And that
Yeah.
is that what you think was the kind of the biggest shift from going from that kind of space of feeling like you couldn't access those emotions even if you wanted to then that time where you said there was like this release. And I kind of call it these like cycle of emotions that a lot of the times, even I've had moments where I can see the end result. Like, I can see, let's say, big things that have happened in my life. I already can see the good from it. I can already see why it happened. I can already see how it's going to improve my life going forward. And so I got in a habit of short circuiting the emotion because I already got to the resolve. So I was kind of like, okay, I've already canceled out the bad part of why this is happening, and I've already moved on very quickly. And it's one of my greatest attributes. It's also for work and things that I do, but for myself, it tends to pigeonhole me a little bit. So I had to kind of go back and relearn a little bit. And emotions have to be cycled through. Like, you can understand why they happen, but if you don't physically let them cycle through, even if it's for an hour a day, whatever that might be, it stays, it hangs out there, and it just comes up in different ways. So for that moment for you, was it that session and that time and kind of a different perspective that helped you like lean into that and then the energy healing? Or what do you think was the biggest shift to allow that access?
I've always considered myself a spiritual person. I've been on a journey for sure.
Yeah.
But I think that the spirituality that I was connected to was an exterior, right? Like through
Mm-hmm.
books and knowledge and things that help me to understand things in different ways, but not experiential.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until I was a place where I was like, I have nothing left. I have
Yeah.
no option as far as like tools to
Mm-hmm.
get through this feeling and get through this part in my life. I have to just be open to anything.
Mm-hmm.
And to, I mean, like, Santron guided me through that for sure. It was just a matter of helping me to I mean, I had to trust, right? I remember at the beginning of our conversation, he was saying, it's okay. Just continue to go through it. You're going to be stronger. Right. And I had to trust him. And 2 weeks later, I was stronger. Right. Two
Right.
weeks later, I had evidence of being stronger. But in
Right.
that moment, it was just like, well, I just feel like dying right now. Like, I
Right.
don't, what do you mean? Like, this
Yeah.
isn't any better. So I think it was just a matter of needing to experience the lows to have contrast to then find naturally, so be given naturally solutions from the universe to pull me out of that, to be on in the higher points.
Yeah. That's almost like the reward for doing the work. I feel like we get rewarded, even though in those moments it feels like we're not. But when we do lean in and are vulnerable, it definitely gets rewarded.
For
So
sure.
that's definitely what happens there. And I have found happens too. It's like right when it's like at the point you're like, this is so uncomfortable, it changes.
I have a question for you.
Uh-huh.
If you weren't primed up for something for me.
Yeah, go ahead.
Um, so I feel like, well, I need to understand the feminine side more, the
Uh-huh.
female side perspective more. And so from the female perspective, I find there are a lot of women who have been let down by men and by the
Mm-hmm.
masculinity repeatedly throughout their lifetime,
Mm-hmm.
either early on, either severely, or either just, gradually, little by little.
Mm-hmm.
And it puts them into masculine in a way that it
Mm-hmm.
makes it really hard for them to be vulnerable and to open up and to be in touch with their feminine side.
Mm-hmm.
How, what advice would you have for women that are in that, maybe not even know, right? Like what we're talking about is kind of a different language, right? Like
Right.
maybe they just
Right.
feel like they could be a little bit more vulnerable,
Mm-hmm.
that they want to be a little bit more open, that they don't feel connected to their partner,
Mm-hmm.
and that the energy is not aligned in a way that feels comfortable to them,
Mm-hmm.
but they are uncomfortable, or they do want to talk about certain things with their partner, but they just don't
Yeah.
feel like they can. How can they get past? They don't. I think that probably the majority, they don't realize that it comes from not being able to be safe and secure,
Mm-hmm.
and like they should have been in certain circumstances in their life. But how? I mean, where do they even start, right? Like, how do
Yeah.
they know? I don't think that it matters really the why,
Mm-hmm.
but that they're feeling a certain way, like they're not feeling safe, like they're not feeling able
Yeah.
to be 100% vulnerable, or maybe they don't even realize that they're not being that vulnerable. There's just like, I feel like a lot of women that are affected by not feeling safe and secure in the presence of masculinity, and they've had to
Mm-hmm.
embody that themselves, and a lot of times never get out of that. And what type of advice do you have for women that are in that scenario, and just to be able to kind of help them to be more in what is natural, so that if they're around a truly masculine man, then
Yeah.
the dynamic is a little bit easier.
Yes. Oh, that is a good one. So I have found, like you said, it doesn't necessarily matter what happens, but sometimes is a big factor. So I will say there tends to be a common thread. And I know for myself, up until um, my husband died, there was this common thread that things happen to me that I don't have control outside of myself, and that what people do and how they treat me, my hands are tied. And it's kind of like, okay, I'm just walking in almost blind. And that is, I think, regardless of what the situation is, where we start to put up this wall and this defense mechanism. And what I have found is that it's almost like we can't rely on the masculine in our eyes, right? Let's say can't rely on the masculine. So I have to pick up that piece now. And so now I'm doing all of it. And not only am I doing all of it, which is exhausting, we all know, regardless, when we try and do everything, it gets exhausting. That's also not naturally where I reside. So if I don't naturally reside in the masculine, which we know there can be females, there can be women that reside in the masculine and they're with a partner, that a man that resides in the feminine, you just have to have that. You got to figure out which one is your thing. And you have to nurture that and understand where you strive and where thrive and where need to get that balance. So when you pick up all those pieces and you take on that role, not only is that not doesn't allow that polarity from a partner. So I'm not going to attract a masculine in his true masculinity if I'm holding that piece too, because there isn't someone in their masculinity that's like, that is appealing to me. This woman who is extremely rigid and in her masculine and lone wolf kind of survivor mode, that doesn't appeal to the masculine. So one, you'll continue to attract. And that's normally where the spiral gets, where it happens. We just continue to attract this. And then we continue to get more experiences to, confirm what we're already worried about and fearful of. So that's the spiral that we get into. And we kind of get stuck there. To get out of that, for me, I kind of got obliterated and brought back down to like the foundation level. Like I had nowhere to go but up. So for me, I had no other option but to try something new. And that meant I pretty much, it was like learning how to walk again. And that was with all things in life and who I was. Through that process, what I found out is that the common denominator in that was me, one. The other part to that was that if I could take responsibility for those situations in my life and those people, that meant I also could be the solution. So now I wasn't relying on someone else to treat me a perfect way. So I had to get really clear on who I was and what mattered to me. And then to jump ahead and kind of get to the question of how to, once you get to this place and you start to figure out how you operate, lean into that flow, and you're in a relationship and you are with a masculine and a feminine. And as the feminine, trying to figure out, how do I let that wall down? Most of the time, if you are with a masculine, that you have let that wall down, because he wouldn't be there if that wasn't the case. So one, you've done something to release that vulnerability. The second thing is, I find I have to really get on board with what I'm wanting to talk about. So that might be, I have to get on board with, if I want to talk about, let's say, an intimate part of our relationship that I want to be really vulnerable and say, I would love for this to be, to be a part of our relationship more. If there was something I wanted to bring to the table, I have to get on board with it myself and figure out, why am I bringing this up in the first place? Where is it that I'm feeling so vulnerable about this, which isn't bad. It's not bad to be vulnerable, but I normally go through this kind of, okay, if I'm feeling really vulnerable and I want something that I'm not getting, I got to figure out what this want is that I think I need to get externally first. And I need to fulfill that myself. Because what I do is, if I show up into a relationship and I ask for certain things, or I say, I don't like this, I want this, and I'm not doing it for myself, I'm not really setting the standard or helping someone support me. Because it's like, I want you to do this for me, but I'm not doing it. So then someone's kind of like, okay, so what is it that you want me to do? And if you find it tends to be really clumsy, a lot of the times it just doesn't last very long. It's a temporary fix. So I find I have to get really clear on what it is I want to talk about or bring up, and what that actually is for me internally before I bring it up. And then, to be honest, the vulnerability, it's not as scary, because I'm so rooted to what it is that I want and why. And that I know that I would love for it to show up in this person. But I also know I have my own back. Like, I also know how to do this myself. It's like that balance of the feminine and letting it flow, and also knowing to directing the energy. I would love this partner of mine to hold this piece for me. But I had to figure out first why I wanted that piece held. And then I could be like, hey, like, when you're really confident about something and a really good like business idea or something, when you're not sure, we tend to get a lot of outside input, and we get a lot of people giving us feedback. And we're like, what do you think about this? Do you like this? Like, and then when there's something we know, like, hell no, like this, I know for a fact this is good, we don't really ask for outside opinion. Like, we're kind of just like, this is what I'm going to do because it feels so right. It's kind of how I go into, not always, I'm not perfect, but how I try and go into those vulnerable situations, So I'm rooted to what I'm asking for, and it makes it less scary, and the partner can pick it up what I'm putting down a little easier. Did that make sense? It was a very long-winded answer to what you asked me.
It definitely makes sense. It also
Okay.
comes from a very mature perspective, right? Like
Yeah.
you're like, you know, the tools, you have a lot of the tools. So you're like, okay, I need to get in tune with myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like a lot of times women are not anywhere near there. They just know that they don't like the relationship for some reason and
Right.
that there's something missing. And they think like, oh, I feel like I've got this frog in my throat that I need to get out, that I need to talk about, but I don't feel like safe enough to do it. And there's only so much that the masculine can do to have to hold that open, safe space. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I mean, I think also I always try to take full responsibility for anything. So if that frog in the throat still exists, then
Yeah.
probably there's still aspects of the man not being masculine enough to help to evoke that. I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
but it's just that I don't know. It's just interesting
This.
because I talk to a lot of men and women, and the men are complaining about the rigidity and how they're closed off. And all I can do is give them advice on how to be better and more masculine, and usually that works a lot,
Mm-hmm.
but won't work like permanently. There's always this ebb and flow, this hot and cold of them trying to get out of this masculine frame that they were already embodying before.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not like 100% of the time. It's like they're kind of working out the kinks of that masculinity, or somehow like
Yeah.
shedding it, but it doesn't happen overnight. It's like
Oh yeah.
over time, but there's like a lot of ebb and flow, back and forth, hot and cold in between.
Mm-hmm. But the beautiful thing that you touched on is that I find with energy work and the way that I kind of approach all of this is whatever we put out there, we get back tenfold. So that's kind of how energy works, right? If we were to think like scientifically, like what energy doesn't get created or destroyed, it changes form. So if I'm putting out all this energy that I'm working on myself, that I am taking responsibility, that I'm, grounding and rooting to who I am on a soul level, I'm going to create that in someone else, whether that's a partner or coworker or whatever it might be. I'm going to create that. So, like you said there's a part of the masculinity that feels like if there's this frog in the throat, there's something, I don't want to take words out of your mouth, that I'm not doing that's not supporting this, and that we're still in this kind of cycle or funk. And that's the magic to me. Because if you have two people that are taking responsibility, there's no end in sight in a good way. Like it means that I'm constantly playing with, not in a, beat down kind of way, but I'm constantly evolving and kind of molding energy to create this really beautiful dynamic. And the other person is doing the same thing. So that's the part where I think it's pretty magical, where I can take, while I'm taking responsibility for my shit, you're over there taking responsibility for your shit. And then there's a point where we meet in the middle. And that's where it's like, okay, we worked out this kink and it's kind of clumsy for a minute. And then you kind of get into this sync. And I find it kind of like, people can't see me, but it's kind of like that teeter totter, kind of like that. And then all of a sudden it kind of starts to like balance out a little more. And you still have moments, but they're not like these big things. But I have found, I used to be back in the day, like 5+ years ago, I was for sure not, I was definitely more in my masculinity. Had armor up. I was defensive. I was protective of all the things. I was very like talking at people, arguments. Like this is just night and day for me. But where I was operating from was a fear-based place. And I was like, I'm not going to get fooled again. I'm not going to have someone treat me a certain way again. And this is how I thought you armor up, because we're told that men are strong, right? Men are strong and they do this. And if I need to go against a man who's not treating me right, or not talking to me right, or not respecting me, I have to act like one to protect myself. And that's actually the opposite, because what I did is I just kept attracting more of that and more of that and more fear, right? I was giving myself like, okay, yes, you do have a reason to be worried that you're picking the wrong people. And so until I diminished that and thought, okay, obviously how I'm doing this is not working. I'm going to try something completely different. And I leaned into the femininity of flow and leaning into myself. Like, okay, if I get really clear on who I am, there's no possible fucking way I can, sorry, she in the room, that I can
No,
attract.
it's all good.
Okay. That I'm going to attract someone who's not soul aligned too. So as long as I stay in my lane in the sense of like focus on myself and being the best version of myself and soul aligned and leaning into those spots that are me, I'm going to attract someone who is going to be doing that same thing. So it kind of puts this I would say I've never been so trusting and less fearful in my entire life. And a lot of people would say with what I've been through, I should be the most fearful. I should be the most on edge. And I've thrown caution to the wind in the sense of fear does not hang out in that spot because I know the work that I'm doing and I know it has to be matched. So people don't really find me anymore that aren't that match. So that's what I would tell someone the vulnerability and all of that. Get really clear on your thing. The nagging, I hear that a lot. I don't know if you hear that as far as like the masculine will say the feminine nags and all I can never, I'm damned if I do, I'm damned if I don't. I never can make her happy. She says she wants this, I do it. She's still not happy. Like I just can't do it right. And that's that sense of we're asking other people to fulfill something for us. One, that we're sometimes not really clear on what we really want. Like if a female is, the feminine is coming to the masculine saying, I want more connection and attention, and you're not giving it to me. And then the masculine's like, okay, um, here, I'll come and we'll watch TV together at the end of the night, or we'll do this, but he's on his phone the whole time, or it's like, we're asking for something, but we're really not asking for what we wanted. We wanted intimacy. We want, in that moment, let's say someone really wanted, depth and intimacy. So that could be a 15-minute, conversation on the drive to go pick up your kid from school. That could be more intimate and connecting than an hour someone took out of their day thinking they want to sit on the couch and not be working. Right. So it's getting really clear on what it is that you want and figuring out how to give that to yourself and then how to communicate that. It's like this 3-part, it's like this trifecta. So I think giving it to yourself, I find if I feel like I want more connection from someone, I'm like, okay, if I'm wanting something outside of myself, then there's something that I'm not connecting with internally. Cause it's almost like we don't look elsewhere unless we kind of panic, like we're in scarcity mindset. Like I don't have it, I need to find it. So if I'm looking for it, that's a huge indicator to me, one, that I'm not giving it to myself. So I'm like, okay, if I want more connection, okay, well, this whole week has been just a cluster. I haven't connected with myself. I haven't sat down and even checked in with how I'm doing. Like, what do I want to do today outside of the usual day-to-day things? So those things are really important. The communicating piece is the next stage that I found was super powerful once I realized how to communicate, did all those steps, and then how to communicate what I wanted and to get that in return. That was the other piece that I found. Once I figured that piece out, it was a game changer. It was like, it just has a different energy to it. So could talk about this all day. Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's why we're here.
But I appreciate that question. That's like on both sides, right? We're trying to figure
Yeah.
out as the feminine how to support the masculine. And I think sometimes that gets lost.
Well, yeah, and the question is like, how does the masculine support the feminine in the female?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because, sometimes they don't know how to be vulnerable or to tap into like what you're saying as far as like tapping into yourself. That's a very feminine thing, right? But
Right.
there's a woman who's in their masculine, they're not
Mm-hmm.
going to think at all about that.
Mm-hmm.
And, you said about like attracting a certain person, right? We're
Mm-hmm.
like always putting out this vibration, this frequency, and we attract certain people for certain reasons,
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily it being, but the thing I have a problem with is like sometimes it's not going to be 100%
Mm-hmm.
in tuned 100% of the time with what resonates with you and what is great, right? So I used to say like, okay, well, I need to kind of communicate with my partner and say, we need to, I wish you could be this way, or I want you to be that way, or kind of like
Mm-hmm.
controlling a little bit, or
Mm-hmm.
trying to change the person. And lately I've said, like, we're either going to align or we're not, right? I'm going to
Right.
communicate what it is that I want, and we're either going to align or we're not. How does the masculine
Mm-hmm.
communicate to the feminine in a way that does not seem controlling or
Mm-hmm.
changing, but helps them to open up in a way, because the guys are like, "Oh, are you okay? Is everything okay? Is there
Yeah.
something you want to talk about?" But
Yeah.
really, that just kind of shuts them down. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so instead of just, I mean, I know that leadership is the best way, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
if I'm leading from a masculine perspective, it's going to help them to feel more safe and secure in their feminine.
Yeah.
But is there anything more that a man can do to like actually have a conversation that doesn't seem like an attack?
Yeah. I think that's a beautiful question. I think what I have found is certain things, like I was saying, we want in a relationship. This could go for the masculine or the feminine. We want something, like I said, because we're not giving it to ourselves. So if I want someone who is attentive, or if I want someone who is, I would say for anyone, any person, regardless of where you resonate with, to just take it very like literal. So the masculine this will be easier for the masculine, most likely than the feminine, is I'm wanting this. You could practically write it on a piece of paper, let's say, to make it tangible. I'm wanting this from my partner. Then going to our own life and saying, where am I not doing this for myself? So if I use that option of connection, or let's say support. I find the masculine is super, what's the word? They really strive and really yearn for support from the feminine. And that can be for what they're creating in this life, what they're, how they take care of themselves, whatever it might be. Support is huge of their purpose. So if the masculine's wanting support, the feminine is, in their eyes, not giving it. I would look and say, okay, if I'm wanting this, where am I not supporting myself? Where is an area of my life? Could it be financial? Could it be socially, like how I'm perceived? Could it be vocationally? Could it be spiritual? Could it be that there's something that I'm meant to be learning and evolving with, and I'm not supporting myself and figuring that out? So that's where I'd start there, right? So I'm giving you kind of the energy answer. As far as then we get to the point of, okay, I'm at the point now where I've kind of figured out my stuff. I'm clear. I'm going to have a conversation, or I want to support in some way. The masculine checking in with the feminine is actually quite a wonderful thing. Like, and I think where it gets tough is the feminine does really well with yes or no questions. So if you come to me and say, what's going on? Instantly, especially if I'm in like a level 10 emotion, let's say 0 to 10, and I'm in a 10 emotion, anything above a 3 or a 4, your brain is like shut off. Like I'm not thinking clearly. So if I'm in a 10 about something and my partner comes up to me and says, what's wrong? I'm like, well, where do I begin? Like, I barely know what's wrong. I just know I feel a certain way. So yes or no questions are really helpful. I'd say, like, just to throw out some like tips, like, hey, are you okay? Is something wrong? Is there something I can do to support you? I'm noticing you seem like something might be bothering you. Can I help? What can I do? What can I do to support you? Because that's pretty much where the feminine really leans into the masculine, that like grounded, rooted leadership of, I see that something's going sideways and I'm here, and I want to be here for you. Tell me what I can do to be there for you. Is kind of, you guys want, it's almost like the feminine has to direct the energy, the masculine is going to complete the task and actually follow through with it. So that's where I find the masculine is super powerful. So it's kind of just showing up, but that means that the masculine has to be really good with mastering those emotions, right? Because when a partner is going sideways, right, and we're trying to figure out what's going on, a lot of the times the masculine is in an emotional state too. It looks different, but inside they're frustrated, or they're angry, or they're frustrated with themselves that they missed something, or that they can't make her happy. And so it's a really, to be able to bring your own emotions down, deep breaths, just knowing that showing up and asking, and the yes or no question helps us kind of figure ourselves out and figure out, because half the time, if I'm asked what's wrong and I'm still processing what's wrong, but my external is showing it. Like I'm for sure it's obvious that something is wrong, but I haven't had the time to sit with it and be like, actually, I don't even know what to tell you is wrong. I just know I'm pissed off. So the yes or no questions help with that. It helps us kind of get through our own head. And then the really mastering the emotions, because if the masculine comes up and is frustrated and said, what's wrong? Like there's a very different tone of what's wrong? Like what's wrong now? Like it's a very different for the feminine to feel like, let me tell you what's wrong. It's kind of like, oh no, I'm not going to tell you. Like you don't want to hear what's wrong.
Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't ask if
Right.
I didn't want to know. Well, the way you said it, it kind of like it snowballs this. We've all had those experiences. So yes or no questions are super helpful. And also time. I This has been something that hasn't been my favorite in the past. And with time, I've really loved it. And I have found that if you have this system in place where everyone starts to clock their emotions, like if I'm frustrated and I'm at a level 10, my partner's at a level 10, we're getting nowhere. The best thing to do is to say, hey, like a safe word. I have like this safe word and it's like, hey, or like a level, like I'm at a level 10. And then partner knows like, oh, okay, we're not going to get anywhere fast right now. I just need a minute to process. And then you kind of, if you're in the real heat of it, that could be said. You could say you have to go to the bathroom. I've told people this trick that no one ever fights you on saying you have to go to the bathroom. So if you need to take a couple minutes to go, say you have to go to the bathroom, take some deep breaths and figure out what it is you're actually upset about, that's super helpful to everybody. So that's something I find, clocking the emotion. And I have found the most powerful discussions have been when the masculine chooses to help and is leaning in and they make sure their emotions are down, because that creates a very safe place very quickly and you'll get to the root of it really fast. But if you're frustrated and you're anything past a level 3, and that's where that intuition comes in, you got to kind of be like, hey, where am I? What scale am I? Is this my 10? Is this my 5? Is this my, and if you're a butt, you need to get yourself around a 3 before you decide to ask the question, or just know that it's going to be a little clumsier than you probably want. And that's okay. Those moments happen and they're meant to. Um, the other thing with the conversation of what, and then I'm going to let you talk because I've been talking so much, is when I'm wanting something, I'll actually preface it and play with it in a way of what is it that I'm really loving that I'm getting. So if I'm wanting more attention, but I really loved a time that my partner texted me randomly just to say hi, I make sure that I really love when I hear from you during the day. Like that means a lot. You kind of feed the positive to get more. It's like telling a captain on a ship, like there being a storm and being like, don't go, don't go over there where the storm is. I'm like, okay, well, where do you want me to go? Because now all I can think about is I'm going to the storm. Like you've now put that in my head. Like when someone says, don't look, and you look,
Yeah.
right? So it's that same idea, directing the energy in the positive form to get more of what you want instead of saying what you're not liking. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I have it. That was great. Thank you for all that. That makes a lot of sense. There's
Uh-huh.
a couple of things that you said that were interesting to me. So you just said, I mean, like focusing on what you want instead of what you don't want,
Yeah.
energetically attracting that thing.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes when I do that, I feel like my actual feelings are not being heard
Mm-hmm.
or addressed because I'm kind of ignoring them and focusing on what I want
Mm-hmm.
instead of talking about what's, and I feel
Yeah.
like that's where the relationship as a self-development
Mm-hmm.
tool comes into play, is like, this is actually a bullet, a trigger in me.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about it and
Mm-hmm.
why it's triggering related to you, but actually it's a benefit to me. But this, instead of me just ignoring it and focusing on what I like about you and I
Mm-hmm.
like about our relationship, let's have a conversation and release this trigger that maybe came from the past. I'm sorry for it being your burden right now,
Mm-hmm.
instead of, me just being perfect. But, it's kind of hard to, like, the balance of that, of when is it okay to have conversations that are more for your selfish
Mm-hmm.
needs than than like just keeping the peace in a relationship. And I'm not saying like from a tolerance standpoint, but
Mm-hmm.
more from an allowance standpoint
Yeah,
of allowing people to be who they're going to be and also reflecting back on yourself. But I feel like some of that you need the rain to have the sunshine sometimes. You need to kind of go
for
into those
sure.
dark places. You also mentioned about it's interesting that you said that the yes and no questions is the key because from what I've been taught, basically a man is like a stone, like a rock,
Mm-hmm.
a woman is like water or liquid,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so you said it's really super important for the man to be emotionally sound.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I feel like all of these times when masculine let the feminine down or circumstances happen that were traumatic in their life,
Mm-hmm.
they have all this venom that's
Mm-hmm.
built up into their body.
Mm-hmm.
And so I love it when I get into a situation where I can get a woman to start talking.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't even matter actually like what they're talking about because a lot of times, sometimes they don't care about, like, it's not like they're trying to be heard in a way that the words are can be worked out like a
Mm-hmm.
masculine thing of like, figuring out this puzzle, but more
Yeah.
just getting the stuff out. And it may be about an ex-boyfriend. It may be about, uh, something that triggers the man in a certain way. And those moments are where I think relationships are built, where the foundation and the real strength of a relationship is built is if the man can say like, oh, instead of saying, I can't believe why do you still care about him? Right.
Mm-hmm.
Or
Mm-hmm.
something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, like, oh, I bet that was frustrating. How, what else does that make you feel? And
Mm-hmm.
getting them to open up more. And that's really where I try to stay is in that place.
Mm-hmm.
And the yes or no, like focusing on just yes and no, I feel like is, I don't know, different from a different perspective than I'm used to.
Well, let me clarify. So I think you're bringing up some really beautiful points. So the yes or no is kind of in the heat of the argument in a moment where there's emotions going on. Let's say a partner did something, I got frustrated, and then the day built, and I was just now I'm pissed off, and I'm coming off like that. To sit down and ask me like, what's wrong? There could be so many things swirling around that it's hard for me to articulate that. So you'll continue to get an I don't know, or I don't want to talk about it because
Got
we're
it.
still figuring it out. So if you ask, hey, how can I, like, what can I help right now? It seems like you're processing something. Like, no, like, okay, I'd love to be, that you can, it helps dwindle it down. If there's something that is, like you were saying, digging into something, once you start that conversation, once you can get the feminine to open up and kind of understand, like the floodgates open, right? Like if you say, are you upset about something I did earlier? Like, is it something that I did before dinner? Like it'd be like, yes. And like, okay. And then it gets like, well, I didn't like that you did this and this brought up this for me. And then it kind of like opens up. It's kind of that initial gateway to get the conversation going. Cause sometimes as the feminine, we're in our head and we just have feelings and we don't necessarily know how to put words to them. And the masculine likes words. It likes definitive, like what happened? What is this? So I know how to fix it. I can put it into
Yeah.
my thing and fix it.
Yeah.
And it's hard for us to articulate sometimes. So that would be that where it's like a time and place for that yes or no. Um, and there was something else you touched. What was the thing right before? I just had one thing I wanted to say about it. It was about shoot. It was the thing right before you.
Yeah, I know. Sorry.
Shoot, that's okay.
Um,
I guess it doesn't need to be said. That there was something I was going to say to help with that, but I can't. I can't think of it now. But if I do, I'll bring it up then.
yeah, I don't remember either.
It's
Can't
okay.
rewind it yet.
Yeah.
Uh,
But
so what would you say if I was to
yeah.
say that all situations
Mhm.
where you were at a 10 out of a 10 is the
Mhm.
masculine's fault?
What would I say? There's two parts that I would say about that. I would say there's a part of me that's like, yeah, I would like someone else to take the responsibility because I'm tired of taking the responsibility. So there's a piece of me that finds that to be a relief, kind of like, okay, good, it's not my problem. You take this now and you handle it. There's a piece of that that feels like a relief. And then I would say the other side of that would be I'm not getting to the root of why that's there. And if I assume that then you have to be the one to fix it, if it's your fault, that means I have my hands are tied and I have no way to fix it ever without you.
Well, I'm not saying you can't have an emotional charge. I'm saying if
Mm-hmm.
two people in a relationship are both at a 10,
Mm-hmm.
or if, something happens, the feminine is getting higher in level
Mm-hmm.
and then masculine, like that pressure is
Mm-hmm.
emotion, this
Mm-hmm.
feminine, right? And so
Right.
if the man is a rock, it never
Yeah.
gets past the 3,
Oh,
right?
okay. I hear you. I hear you. Uh-huh. I actually really like that perspective. I like I like that a lot. I would agree with you in the sense of, but is it going back to that where the masculine can't mess up and the masculine has to be this perfect rock all the time and that they can't have them? I know you're not saying they can't, but I guess it would be both because I think you're right. I think it's also the feminine's job's a weird word to use, but role to also understand because the feminine can be sharp and intense and hurtful, like the masculine can be when they're not balanced, right? So it is also just because we naturally are fluid and with emotion, it doesn't mean it's okay for me to use it in a way. I have to also figure my own stuff out and master my own emotions. So that's a tough,
Well, I feel
because
like
I,
the wickedness of the feminine comes from buildup of never being able to be heard, right? And
uh-huh,
so I don't think that naturally a feminine is wicked. I think
right.
that they can be wicked, but it's because they're like never heard. And so they have to create this pain so that
Yeah,
the person hears them and feels them and stops and pays attention
right.
because and so there was never any before then. And so like if I I think that okay, so if a man is being a rock and the woman is the water,
Mm-hmm.
if the feminine is, sorry, excuse me, if the masculine is a rock and the feminine is water,
Mm-hmm.
and the feminine needs to get stuff out, that is the whole point. Is your sharpness, your wickedness is when you need them to be the rock the most. And
Mm-hmm.
that's where the make or break of relationships happen, is at that moment. So if you can be sharp and
Mm-hmm.
trying to cause pain, what you're really doing is, I had this pain from the past
Mm-hmm.
that is still with me right now. I want to know if you can handle me, or if you can help me to get through this, or you can be here for me when I'm feeling this certain type of way, or are you going to get angry at me? Are you going to yell at me? Are you going to run away? Right. And so I think that
Mm-hmm.
that is like a natural feminine test. And instead of the masculine taking it personal,
Mm-hmm.
that's that's when it gets to a 10, is like he's taking it personal because there's a sharp. But the sharp, if he just says, oh, she's being real sharp right now, she's being, she's being very wicked right now,
Mm-hmm.
because right afterwards right afterwards it becomes a very different situation if he can just
Very true.
like take some of that venom, and then afterwards she's got that all that relief and like, oh, he was still here. Not to say big difference between tolerance and allowance,
Right.
right? Like he cannot be emotional, like just holding it in. He
Yeah.
really has to be like, oh, she's just processing
Yeah.
some stuff right now. It has nothing to do with me, and I'm going to ride this wave, and
Mm-hmm.
afterwards everything is going to be okay, and we can talk about it in a more peaceful manner.
Mm-hmm.
So would you say that you agree with that?
I think I like that. I like your perspective on that. I think that definitely when I have been met in those situations with more of that, um, the masculine kind of holding ground, being like, oh, I see, oh, here we go. Like I see we're going to go on this, like you said, riding the wave. Like I see we're going on this journey. I'm here. I just want to support you. I don't want you to feel. You're welcome to feel however you want to feel. My job is I want to help support you and have you feel better. And being calm and being like present. I think you're right. I think there is the times that I have been met with that. It also diffuses the feminine, right? It diffuses that. It's like
The
when you're met.
wickedness.
Yes, it
Yeah.
diffuses that. So I think you're spot on that, being on understanding that approach, that that space holding and that comes from the masculine really doing their work too, right? Because otherwise it turns into, like you said, being tolerant of it or not it becoming a bigger problem. But if the masculine is doing their work in the sense of they can hold that space and still be this strong person and be that support, that's kind of a win-win for everybody. Because then you start to figure out how you flow and do things. But I can say, yes, I would agree that the times that I've been met with that sort of presence in those moments have been the most powerful and the most memorable in the sense of feeling very supported and seen and safe. And it almost kind of helps diffuse bigger ones. And the next time, because you kind of are like, oh, okay, I see you saw me and you heard me and you didn't try and, you know, put concrete, like put my emotions in a box. Like these are very fluid. I think the second the masculine tries to be like very rigid with our emotions and like how we're feeling, it like the lid blows off. So in a very long-winded way, yeah, I think I like that. I like that approach. And I think that that makes a lot of sense from the perspective that you're talking about.
So do you think that conflict is necessary, that heightened conflict is a necessary part of relationships?
I do. I think conflict, I am not someone who is scared of conflict. I think some people steer away from it. I do think it's necessary. I think you do it. There's no right or wrong, but there's a way to do it that is in the most highest frequency, intentional way. And I think the intention is I'm not here to prove you right or me right or you wrong. There's an intention here equally that we both want this and we both want to show up for each other equally. And there's this intention. And so that naturally comes out. So yes, I think conflict is 100% it has to happen. I don't think any relationship is perfect. And I have found the most growth points happen when we kind of bump up against those tough spots. So I do think conflict, I think it's the intention behind it. If two people go in to prove someone wrong or right, that's a recipe for disaster, in my opinion.
Okay, got it. Do you mind if I provide a framework that I was taught for men to
Yeah,
kind of be a little bit
absolutely.
better with that?
Yeah.
So if they're imagining that they are rock and woman is water,
Mm-hmm.
and instead of trying to react emotionally to everything, it could be a circumstance where there never really has to be knockdown, drag out argument and fights between couples if they say, here are my boundaries. If they're clear on what it is their boundaries are, and there's 3 to 5 max boundaries that they stand for. Things like, I'm always going to be a man who provides for my family. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so if his wife says, I'm going to go and spend money that we don't have or ring up the credit cards, he simply says no. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're not going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Not in a fight, in a boundary, but anything within those boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
allowing the feminine to splash and to do what she does, and the water dies down significantly, and there's a lot less splashes, because really all those splashes come from feeling unsafe, insecure, either from that relationship or from past relationships. And so after a certain period of time, there's a container of water that is pretty still. It's still going to rock sometimes, for sure, because that's just part of it. But that's also like sometimes the fun of a relationship. For me, I now look forward to situations where I have to remain calm, where I can, where there might be some of that wickedness that comes my way, and I can show up because I could tell someone that I love them till the cows come home. I could bring them flowers. I could do nice gestures for them. But in those moments when you're able to take that venom for them and get it and help them to get it out, because it's not like we're embodying it. We're not. It comes,
Yeah.
it splashes off of us, it's gone, right? Like, we're not holding on to it forever, right? So it's
Mm-hmm.
we're dissipating it, we're neutralizing it. It's not like it's hurting us unless we let it emotionally affect us. And
Mm-hmm.
so once that's gone, once that venom comes out, then they're like, oh my God, this is a man that I want to be with, that I can feel safe with, that I can feel secure with, that I don't need to test all the time, that I don't need to nag at all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it's just kind of like, I'm not saying ignoring, I'm not always paying attention to what she says and being really present with what she's saying to you. And like looking at those moments as a challenge and an opportunity to deepen the relationship instead of something that you're scared of. Like, oh, she's always so wicked to me. It's like, well, dude, it's because you always fail her tests, always constantly fail her tests. So she's going to keep
Mm-hmm.
shooting that wickedness because she's trying to push you away because you're not sound. You're
Mm-hmm.
not on solid ground. And so she wants you gone in one way or another, or wants to know if you're going to leave. Right. Right. And it's all like
Mm-hmm.
subconscious thing, but
Mm-hmm.
just paying attention to that framework of like only standing for 3 to 5 boundaries, knowing exactly what they are, defining them clearly, and then anything within that, just letting the water splash and you continuing to be a vessel for that.
I love that. That is, I've never heard it approached that way. And obviously, because right, I'm the water splashing. So, but I think that that's amazing. I think that's really something that is extremely powerful and easy for people to kind of grasp. I think those are amazing tools to put in someone's toolbox and figure out how to support the feminine. So,
Like guys will come into our academy and they'll say, I don't have a connection with my wife. We're not as intimate. Sex isn't good. She's not, not
mm-hmm,
doing certain things, whatever.
mm-hmm,
And there's like instantly a change. Guys will come
yeah,
like a week later, like my wife has never bought lingerie ever, and she did yesterday. I'm like, yeah,
yeah.
it's because you listened to her and you let her splash on you a little bit, and
That,
she feels safe, and now it's good. It's all good. It's just
that
I've
is,
seen it like interesting
yeah,
perspective. I've seen it like just being able to feel safe and secure. Why would
yeah,
they want to,
yeah.
be intimate with you if they don't feel safe and secure having a conversation with you?
That is pretty. What I'm realizing as you're sharing this stuff is that that's a pretty amazing way that you've articulated and figured out how to kind of put it into a framework because being the feminine, I don't know if I would have articulated it that way, but that's exactly spot on. Like feeling like you're heard and that connection and feeling like someone sees you and is that emotional connection. It, I think what people don't realize is just like the feminine all day long wants to make their partner happy. They want to create this special environment and this home and be there for them and support. And the second it starts to change or you don't feel seen or you don't feel like someone gets you, you start to kind of pull away regardless of your understanding. And so I think that's a really amazing way you put that because that totally resonates and I think is a huge key to all things in relationships. So thank you for sharing that. I think that's really powerful.
So you said like through the day, just randomly something can happen. I just want to make sure I'm respectful of your time. I know
Uh-huh.
we've been an hour and a half. But
Yeah, I
it's
probably
good
have
conversation.
like five. I would say I could talk about this all day long. I have to go pick up Nash in about five
Oh,
minutes.
okay.
So we'll go, but I want to hear, we always can pick this up, right?
Yeah,
We'll do a part two at some point when you have time again.
sure.
Because I feel like we have more we could even talk about.
Absolutely.
But yeah, tell me what you were going to say or ask.
Well, you said that sometimes something will happen and it'll kind of make you pull away.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like there is times when I've experienced like a hot and a cold or an ebb and a flow, and I feel like I'm doing everything right.
Mm-hmm.
But I also know like sometimes that just happens
Right.
with women needing to process their emotions and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I know there's like a lot of like uh names for things out there, but people say like twin flame, and I looked up the definition of twin flame.
Yeah.
This is basically supposed to be someone who's meant for you. It's like
Mm-hmm.
very suited for you. But
Mm-hmm.
in there it talks about a lot of push and pull. Where
Mm-hmm.
do you think that comes from, and what do you think that actually is?
So my understanding, so what I think of twin flame, I kind of call it in my world like soul complement. And a soul complement is different than a soulmate, but they're kind of one and the same at the same time. Soulmates can be all different forms of people in your life. Soul complement is a romantic partner, and it's the complement to our soul, complement to our soul. And what that means is it's kind of the puzzle piece that doesn't complete us, but it is the pieces of us that are going to push us to evolve and grow to our most soul aligned self. And relationships do that 100%. And it pushes us and triggers us in points that you can't access unless you're in a relationship. I will say that. Like I've done a lot of work, and until I was in a relationship, did it push on the buttons that I actually had to go into action and use what I've learned. And it was tough. And so to me, twin flames are kind of similar to that, like what you kind of hear about. And the hot and cold, as the feminine, because of our emotions, there could be something that happened earlier. And then let's say you do something that feels, you walk in without giving me a hug or something. And normally you come in and give me a hug. And I've already kind of been off on my day. Now I've instantly gone into my emotions, and now I'm thinking like, what's going on? Like what? Not in the sense of like, but kind of like now I'm starting to get revved up. Then something else happens, right? And now I'm distant because now I'm just a little pissed off. And then you're kind of confused because you're like, what's just like, I could feel something, but I don't know what. I don't know if it's worth bringing up a conversation yet. So I'm just going to kind of lean in. Ooh, it's a little spicy. Like you can kind of, it sounds like you get what that hot and cold. And what I find it normally boils down to is, of course, figuring out something triggered it, right? And then spiraled it, which isn't always someone else's. But as the masculine, as you, I think, have been so willing to share and showing up in that presence, what the masculine can do is a lot of the times we want that connection and that's to be seen and that attention. Even if it seems like we're cold, it's because now we have a wall up and we don't know kind of how to get back. Like, does that make sense? Like, it's kind of like once our wall goes up, it takes a lot of self-awareness and work to put that wall back down, especially if someone's not meeting us, to be like, hey, I see how we doing? Like, you know what I mean? So I think that hot and cold, I have found for myself, someone acknowledging and almost giving more attention, almost like pouring love onto it, is like the best way to diffuse that. And doesn't mean people don't need their time and their space, but in those hot and cold moments, and you're like, I feel like I'm doing everything right. Racking your brain, being like, what did I do wrong today? Like, I called her this morning. I said, good morning. Like, I invited her over here. Now she's like mad. Like, I don't know what's going on. Like, it's that connecting point, and attention seems to always diffuse it. And it's that kind of love piece of like the masculine showing up in that presence, but also kind of having to be in the feminine a little bit and like leaning in with emotion, because what happens is now the feminine is in the masculine, which she doesn't want to be there. It's very uncomfortable. Like whenever I'm in that space, it like makes my skin crawl. So you can pull us out of it, but it's almost like to balance the polarity, the masculine kind of has to lean in to the feminine a little bit. Does that make sense? Like what I'm saying?
Right.
Okay.
And that's what, yeah, for sure. I appreciate that. I think there's just an unlimited amount of possibilities.
Yeah.
When you're talking, I like the thought of, and really have started to see evidence of like that a great relationship is someone who, like, just for example, a man who is 60% masculine, 40% feminine, a woman who's 60% feminine, 40% masculine, right? But those numbers are going to ebb and flow. But like, it's weird because it's the masculinity movement basically says like 100% masculine all the time, or you can, or else you're going to push away this girl and she doesn't have anything but her emotions. And so she's going to think you're a simp and blah, 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 and all this stuff. Right. But like sometimes love does need to happen, and you do need to, I mean, it's like a delicate dance of the man being the masculine and feminine, and the woman being the feminine and the masculine, and kind of I think that the perfect combination in a relationship is like that perfect combination of someone who's similar but mirrored, as far as like those ratios. But
no, I think I know. And it's like such this like intricate thing. And it's almost like easier to take like specific examples and be like this particular example, and then like give like an understanding, because it is so fluid, right? It changes and depending on the person and the situation. But I think I've really enjoyed the fact that what you've brought to the table with all of this is, again, that exactly what we've been talking about, like that masculine, rooted, grounded energy. And here I was telling you, and I don't think I even really realized, I'm talking to you as the feminine, right? I'm like, I'm taking responsibility. I'm going inward. and I'm figuring out what I need to do differently and how I need to shift to show up or to attract that in my partner. And here you're doing the outward motion and giving me, talking about examples of the masculine being like, well, it's the masculine job to lean in and to be there and to be strong and to be, I use the word strong, emotionally, that strength and that grounding and that rooting. So it's interesting that I realized as we were talking that how I was talking to you about how this is how it goes. And you're like, and this is how it also goes. So I found that really interesting that we both kind of showed up in the spaces that we hang out in.
For sure.
So,
yeah. No, I mean, this has been a great, easy conversation, and I think valuable to your audience for sure. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we could go for a while, so I'm happy to do part 2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would love to. It'll probably give us time, right, to sit with this. And then I would love to set up another time to continue more, because we have so many other things we can talk about. But I think this is a really good foundation piece, and both of us kind of figuring out how each other kind of operates. Because then now I would love to hear more about what things that you as the masculine and then as the feminine, and just kind of continue that conversation. I think we could really tackle a lot of really important topics, especially for relationships and just overall life.
For sure. I don't think that there's much out there talking about it being okay for the female to be in their masculine or the male to be in their feminine. Right. And so it's difficult, but you also have that strength to allow me to be whole as a man and be fulfilled in a relationship. So it's, I think that part of it is something that, it's like toxic femininity or feminism movement or toxic masculinity. Don't do that. You know what I mean? It's be masculine all the time. And then we have these rules. Okay. I just need to be dainty and feminine, or I need to be tough and masculine, but we're both human. We're all human. Right. And so there's all those sides to it. So yeah.
Yeah. And I think having grace with each other, everyone's trying to figure it out. When you're in a partnership, you can tell everyone kind of just being okay, we have the same end goal and intention, and we're in this together. Let's get on the same island so we don't feel so separate, and just crank out one thing at a time. It's a process. So that's definitely, but I appreciate everything that you brought to the table. I'm actually I look forward to kind of processing it and sitting with it, because I think you brought a lot of really good points and things that I think are really valuable. So I appreciate that and your time. Cool. And we'll for sure. I just feel like another time I would love that. So I'll be in touch with you, and there'll be a part 2.
All right. Excellent. I look forward to it. Thank you so much, Marlo. I appreciate it.
I appreciate it too. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks so much for being here. Please rate, share, and review so we can stay connected and continue this magical journey together.